Hi friends, welcome back. Today I want to talk about something that hits close to home for me as an artist, and it is chasing your dreams, but more specifically, how you can achieve anything using neuroscience. I'm actually going to go into the depths of this book by James Doty. James Doty is a neuroscientist and a neurosurgeon who has spent decades researching the human brain. And in this book, he covers specifically how the systems in your brain work and how you can rewire them to help you achieve any goal that you set your mind to. Now, Doty calls this manifestation, but I want to get something clear because I feel like there is a bad reputation for manifestation in modern pop culture. This isn't about sitting around with a bunch of crystals and putting your alignments out into the universe metaphorically. This is about manifesting as defined by Doty as defining an intention such that it gets embedded in our subconscious, which functions below the level of consciousness. Each one of us, deep in our subconscious, has deeply ingrained habits, beliefs, and tendencies that can either push us towards achieving the things we want to achieve or might be pulling us away from achieving those things without us even realizing it. So by embedding a certain goal into your subconscious mind, you're actually activating the networks in your brain associated with goal orientation. Your subconscious mind is already doing this. It is constantly deciding which bits of information are salient, noteworthy, or important, and it is filtering out everything else. Which makes sense because our brains are constantly intaking so much data and information, and they can only process so much on a conscious level. But fear not, because Doty discusses in this book how we actually have more control over what our subconscious mind deems important than you might realize. And by training your brain to focus on certain things, you can actually limit and decrease the impact that your external environment has on you, which will make it easier for you to pursue these goals. Now, we're going to break this down into 6 steps, but first, one of the keys before you start trying to learn how to train your brain to manifest certain goals is unraveling this preconceived notion that many of us have, this intrinsic belief that there is an external source either causing your success or causing your failures. And because I already know what's coming, no, this does not contradict spirituality or religion, because this just reinforces the concept of free will here on earth, as well as the concept of you reap what you sow, which is biblical. You alone are responsible for your actions and for the consequences of those actions. Part of this means releasing the idea or notion that every time something bad happens in your life, it was predestined to happen or you're being punished, and releasing the notion that somebody's going to swoop in and save you and make your dreams come true for you. But understandably, it can be really hard to picture yourself as being in the driver's seat of your life if you grew up feeling like life always happened to you. And the author Doty understands this. He actually talks a lot about his childhood, how he grew up with an alcoholic father, a suicidal mother, and they were constantly being evicted and on the verge of homelessness. He grew up feeling powerless, like life happened to him and he had no control over what was going to happen. And if all you've ever known is survival and struggle, it can be really hard to accept the idea that all of these dreams you have are possible for you, for someone like you. Doty says that manifestation is having a fierce belief in possibility. And one of the first steps is understanding that you are already manifesting something right now. You already have embedded beliefs. What are they? What is the life that you have manifested? Now, one last thing before we get into these 6 steps is we have to understand a little bit of how the brain works. If we're going to embed things in our subconscious, we have to understand how things get embedded in your subconscious in the first place. I'm going to simplify this down the best I can, but we're still going to talk about a few networks and systems in your brain. The first one being the sympathetic nervous system, or SNS. The second one being the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system evolved first, and that is what is known as your fight or flight reflex. This is the part of your brain that is trained for keeping you alive and keeping your genes alive, ensuring that your genes survive. Now, later in evolution, as our societies evolved, the parasympathetic nervous system evolved, which is known as the rest and digest. And this is the system in your brain that's responsible for bringing you back to a resting mode after your fight or flight reflex has been activated. It relaxes your muscles and slows down your heart rate. Now, why this matters, why this is interesting, is because according to neuroscience, when we are in rest and digest mode, we have higher functioning in our neocortex, which is the part of our brain involved with creativity, abstract planning, logical reasoning, meaning only when we're in rest and digest mode can we really reclaim our attention, use our imagination, or think logically. In other words, unlocking our subconscious mind. And then the last system I'm going to talk about before we get into step 1 is called the DMN. This is the default mode network in your brain, and it's what controls your brain activity when you are focused inward, when you're daydreaming, when you're reminiscing, when you're in a flow state. So this is the DMN is responsible for what we like to call the chitter chatter in our heads, the inner critics that live in our heads, the voice that just never stops talking, and it's going all day long even when we don't even think about it. And it only really becomes activated when we are not occupied on a specific task. In other words, if you're not thinking specifically about something important, this mode of your brain will just take over and fill the emptiness with chitter chatter. Keep these systems in mind now as we move into step 1. Step 1 to manifestation is reclaim your mind. Inside each one of us is only as much power to change our circumstance as we believe we have. Our beliefs limit our abilities. So the power to change lies first in your belief in the possibility of change. So it starts with believing you can get the degree, you can save $1 million, you can sell out an arena one day. You can get the lead role. You can make a living as an artist and have your dream art studio on the 6th floor of the historic building downtown that you always dreamed of. I am proof that these things are possible, and I was a teen mom. People told me I would end up on welfare when I was pregnant at 15. And a trap that a lot of us fall into is believing that these things are possible for other people, but not people like us. Those things don't happen to teen moms. Those things don't happen to teenagers who grew up homeless. Those things don't happen to people that look like me. The first step is realizing you can grab the steering wheel of your car. So, step 1 is reclaiming your mind. Here's a fun fact for you. The average American spends 1,460 hours per year scrolling on their smartphones on social media. And if you divide that by the average 16 hours of awake time that we have each day, that's 91 days per year. 91 days that the average American spends scrolling aimlessly on their phone, looking at things they won't even remember. But let's tie this back into neuroscience, shall we? The science shows that swiping on social media, on TikTok or on Instagram Reels, is activating the same center in your brain that is activated when a gambling addict plays a slot machine. You are on a constant hunt for the next little dose of serotonin in your brain. So the next step in reclaiming your mind is reclaiming your attention, consciously choosing where your attention goes, where your time goes. Instead of passively letting 2 hours fly by because you're swiping on TikTok, actively realize, I've been on TikTok for 15 minutes. There are better uses for my time. Now, there's nothing wrong with scrolling on TikTok if that's your goal. If your goal is to spend 91 days a year on TikTok, go ahead. But I have a feeling that when you hear 91 days a year, it's a little bit jarring because what you wanted to do did not align with what you did, which is the power of your subconscious mind making most of your decisions for you. Now, of course, as we discussed earlier, it's only really possible to access these levels of logical reasoning in your brain when you are not in fight or flight mode. So, how do you get out of fight or flight mode if you feel like you've been stuck in it your entire life? When every day feels like survival, how do you get your body into rest and digest mode so that you can even make these decisions in the first place? Doty says the first step is cracking the illusion that you are helpless to fight or flight mode, seeing your thoughts for what they really are. And he describes this the best way he can by using the analogy of a train that is speeding rapidly towards a cliff, and you are on that train. Consider it your train of thought. In fight or flight mode, we are tempted to just rapid fire respond as fast as we can. So Doty says the first step is to acknowledge that you're on the train and then jump off the train. And so what does this mean in realistic terms? Well, realizing that you're on the train and jumping off the train might mean not sending the response that you want to respond. It might mean doing absolutely nothing when you want to do everything. It might mean hanging up and putting the phone down for an hour until you are calm. And then only once you return to your rest and digest mode that your parasympathetic nervous system will return you to, then will you be able to look back with logical reasoning and see your thoughts for what they really were in that moment. And then you can respond. Then you can react. You can always react later, but you can never undo a reaction in the heat of the moment. All right, lastly, in step 1 of reclaiming your mind, is Doty gives us a little exercise to do before bed. He says to lay down, close your eyes, and think about a task that you've always wanted to do, but you've never got around to doing. Something like, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. and I'm going to read for 30 minutes. Or maybe I'm going to pack myself a healthy lunch tomorrow. Then you're going to open your eyes, you're going to write it down on a piece of paper, and you're going to put it right next to your bed. And then as soon as you wake up in the morning, you're going to look at that paper and you're going to do that thing. You're going to do it one time that day. You're going to make yourself. And when you do the thing that you said you were going to do, you're going to write down on a piece of paper, I congratulate myself for this task. And you're going to congratulate yourself out loud. In some sense, you're going to find a way to reward yourself for doing the task that you set out to do. Now, repetition of this day after day after day is activating the reward system in your brain. And by activating and associating a reward in your brain with this task that you at first didn't want to do, you're embedding that goal in your subconscious mind. Step 2. Step 2 is clarify what you want. As the term manifestation has become pretty popular in recent pop culture, it has been associated with this pursuit of fabulous wealth. We've been sold a lie that material objects will fill the emptiness in our hearts. So people, when they think of manifesting, they think of the luxury cars, the mansion, the pool. But Doty reminds us that manifestation should actually be about our deepest goals and desires in life. And when you first start realizing how much you can unlock, how much is available to you, when you realize that you can achieve anything, it's probably going to be easy to become flooded with a list of things that you would like to achieve. But in order to navigate to your destination using a compass, you need to have one destination. So we're going to narrow down our goals to specifics. Instead of saying, I want to be rich, what does being rich buy you? Is it your time? What do you really, really want? Besides, what goes deeper than the money? Is it that you want to be free from working a 9 to 5? Is it that you want to be able to travel the world? Is it that you want more time with your family? Is it that you'll finally be able to afford the private chef that'll help you get healthy? Is it the scenic view of the city outside of your window that you want in the mansion? Get specific about what it is you want, and get specific about why you want it. I want $1 million because I want to never check my bank account before I make a purchase again. I want $10 million because I want to pay off my parents' house. Doty gives us an exercise. He says to close your eyes and picture yourself, again, your life zoomed out, but this time he wants you to picture your dream life. You have everything that you want to achieve. Picture yourself like you are a Sims character. What does the day in your life feel like through all 5 senses? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? What does it look like? What do you hear? And what do you feel? What does your new neighborhood sound like out your window? What does the leather in your car feel like and smell like? What does your lunch taste like? What do you hear when you open your door when you get home after work? And then he says to set a timer and write about what you feel as vividly as you can for 5 minutes. And the key here is to feeling the feelings that you will feel when you have those things. And then you're going to take that writing and you're going to hang it somewhere that you're going to see it every day. The key here is that you want to feel those feelings through your senses every day. Because, fun fact, according to neuroscience, the brain cannot distinguish between feelings that are real and feelings that are highly imagined, which means that when you imagine something and you feel those feelings of deep pride or joy or fulfillment, your body cannot distinguish the fact that those feelings aren't real, that they're imagined. And then the release of neurotransmitters in our brain that we know as happy chemicals, like serotonin and dopamine, those get your brain's attention. Those get your subconscious mind's attention. And once a feeling has gotten your subconscious mind's attention, it deems it as important and salient, and then it spends its time around the clock seeking it out again, subconsciously. All right, step 3 is to remove the current obstacles from your mind. So in order to form new habits, we need to make space by breaking old habits. Doty describes something known as the negativity bias, which is something that we were all born with. Remember that sympathetic nervous system that we talked about that puts you in fight or flight mode? Well, at a certain point in time, our environment as humans changed so much more rapidly than our brains could keep up. Our brains couldn't evolve fast enough. And so the same system that was created in place to protect us from a tiger stalking us now gives us deep feelings of insecurity, paranoia, and shame, maybe in social situations. Because somewhere along the line of humanity, our deepest fear went from being attacked by a tiger to not fitting in or people not liking us. And to be fair, from the brain standpoint, positivity has no function in survival. There's no reason to be positive if you're looking at it from a survival standpoint. And so this innate self-protection method in our brain is now the exact thing holding us back from achieving, taking risks, and accomplishing our dreams in life. Darn evolution. And the more of these negative thoughts that we have day after day, week after week, year after year, we are ingraining these deep grooves, these deep habits and patterns in our thought processes, in our mind. Processes. And to highlight the power of consistency, I saw a really cool analogy the other day that said, think about water and a rock. If you were to throw a bucket, a massive bucket, a tsunami of water at a rock, what would happen to the rock? Nothing. Even with the mass volume of water, nothing would happen. But if you let a singular drop of water drip on the same spot on a rock every minute, every 30 seconds for 10 years, what would happen? It would make a hole. And this is how our subconscious mind works. This is why it takes time to form new habits. Imagine your mind is like a deep snow and you have already carved out and shoveled paths. Your brain is always going to take the shoveled path because it is the path of least resistance. It just takes time to shovel out these new paths. And negative thoughts from our childhood are often carried into adulthood and affect us because, fascinatingly, according to neuroscience, the upper levels of the brain can tell time, but the brain stem, the part of our brain that controls your heart rate and your body temperature, cannot tell time. It has no way of understanding the passage of time. Which is why when our childhood traumas or traumas from our pasts are activated, we resort back to thinking and reacting in an infant state. We don't have an understanding that this feeling isn't permanent. So we're a baby crying in our crib and mom isn't coming right away, so mom is gone forever. And this explains why our primal instincts in flight or flight mode are to act in violent and irrational ways. So one way to help yourself jump off that train is to acknowledge and remind yourself, wait, this feeling is temporary. My heart will slow down. My breathing will slow down. I'm going to cool off. And often our limiting beliefs that we have about the world are actually distortions that we created as children to help cope with really painful and difficult environments or experiences. Things like the world is a cruel place, or life isn't fair, so why try? Things like, well, I'm just not good at school, or well, kids like me don't succeed. We created these as a form of self-protection so that we didn't have to face the harsh reality that maybe our caregivers failed us. And Doty says that negative self-beliefs grow in the dark like mushrooms. They grow when we don't even realize that they're growing, and the only way to really get rid of them is to bring them into the light to see them for what they really are. So as an exercise, Doty says to pull out a piece of paper and create 2 columns. You're going to label the left column beliefs. And in that column, you're going to write out a few beliefs that you've always held, probably since childhood, about yourself. Limiting beliefs. Things like, I'm not smart enough. Maybe I'm always unlucky. I always get the short end of the stick, or I'm too old to chase my dream. And then he says in the right-hand column to label it opposite. And whatever sentence you wrote on the left side, without thinking too hard, you are going to create an opposite sentence on the right side. So I'm not smart enough, you're going to write, I am smart enough. I'm always unlucky, you're going to write, I'm always lucky. I'm too old to chase my dreams, I have all the time in the world to chase my dreams. Now, either repeat these opposite phrases to yourself daily or put them somewhere that you're going to read them every day. And it sounds silly at first, but you are working on shoveling those paths through the snow, creating new paths of thought for your brain and making them as easy to travel as possible. That brings us to step 4, embed the intention in your subconscious. So Jim Carrey's $10 million check is probably the most well-known example of visualization and manifesting your dreams that our current pop culture knows about. But his origin story is a little bit less known. So Jim Carrey's mother actually suffered from severe depression when he was growing up, as well as physical ailments like arthritis and colitis. She was essentially always in bed. And Jim Carrey would, perform and entertain anybody who came to the house, but he would also spend his time jumping onto his mom's bed in his underwear and acting out goofy scenes like a praying mantis so that he could get her to laugh and laugh and laugh. He just wanted to make his mom laugh. Now, Carrey has described in interviews that he actually, before he was successful, would drive up to Mulholland Drive in LA, I hope I say that right, every night and look over the city. And while he's looking over the city, he would tell himself things like, I'm such a good actor, I have so many movie deals, everybody wants to work with me. And before he was famous, he wrote himself a $10 million check on paper, a fake one, and he wrote it for acting services rendered. He dated it Thanksgiving 1995, and he put it in his wallet, and every time he opened his wallet, he would look at this check. Well, within 3 years, he had had 3 major movie deals, and he had achieved his goal. He had $10 million in the bank. So let's talk about why this works according to neuroscience. Your brain is very conscientious of its energy consumption. Your brain takes up 2% of your body weight of your entire body, but yet it uses 20% of the oxygen in your body. So it has to be extremely energy efficient. And because of this, our brain resists or rejects stimuli that it's not familiar with. Like with the snow analogy earlier, it takes the path of least resistance, always. In fact, our brain has evolved to constantly be erasing information and memories that it no longer deems relevant or important. This is also what's responsible for the iceberg phenomenon that Doty discusses when intaking information. If you've ever been studying for a test, you have likely experienced this where your brain will choose subconsciously to only retain 10% of the information that you read because it deemed it the most important, and it will forget the other 90%. In other words, it only keeps the tip of the iceberg when processing new information. Now, this is partially, as Doty says in this book, this can be responsible for our own biases. When we are reading information, we are only choosing to process and remember the parts that are applicable to us and our experiences. But the point here is that if your brain is not familiar with a goal, it will reject it to save energy. And sometimes this is what causes us to overlook opportunities. Your brain might just not be showing you examples of what you're looking for because it doesn't know you're looking for it. So the key here is that by visualizing and looking at something like your $10 million check or a vision board on your wall, which I didn't bring it with me, but I had a vision board that actually had this plaque on it 2 years ago, and now I have the plaque. It's crazy that it works. By looking at something every day, you are, number 1, getting your brain intimately acquainted with that image. And number 2, when you look at and visualize that goal, you're feeling those intense emotional feelings, which is, again, training your subconscious mind to seek out more of that feeling. Doty uses an analogy of our subconscious minds as being kind of run by 2 employees. One is a file clerk, and the second is a bloodhound. The file clerk takes the files that are important and files them away in the limited filing space that you have in your mind. The bloodhound, as soon as a file gets filed, their job is to seek out and relentlessly scan your environment for more of that smell. And what the subconscious seeks, the subconscious finds. This is why, have you ever had something on your mind and then suddenly you see it everywhere? You've primed the bloodhound in your mind to be relentlessly on the hunt for more of that thing. Our brain is being bombarded by information every second. Actually 10 million bits of data per second, and our brain can only consciously filter through 50 bits per second. The rest just gets filtered through by our subconscious. This is why there's sometimes a disconnect between what we want to do and what we do. Doty reminds us of another powerful example of manifestation as being the placebo effect. Everybody's heard of these fake sugar pills being given to people suffering actual chronic illnesses, but yet the belief that the pill was real somehow healed their illness. Doty explains that taking the pill signaled to the brain just simply a belief in the possibility of healing, which caused the bodies to change on a genetic level and defeated the disease. That's the power of belief. That brings us to step 5, which is pursue your goal passionately. Ad break. No, not really, but seriously, I have something to show you. This is my vision board. And on my vision board, one of the things was, let's see, this just represented like owning nice clothes, because I grew up without a lot of money, and so I was always insecure about not having name brands. You want to know what happens when you chase your dreams and you manifest your dreams? This happens. I've never owned a designer handbag in my life. And Teddy Blake, New York, just sent me a designer purse. Started with that little vision board on my wall. This is just skip this if you don't want to see, but this is a luxury handbag made in Italy with luxury leather. Oh, it smells like new car. See, that's how you know I'm poor. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited. I promise you, my odds of being robbed just increased exponentially, which is why I can use my shoulder strap. Tired of being overlooked by every robber in the alleyway? Look no further. Get yourself a designer handbag. You're sure to attract the eye of every criminal in town. Now, when pursuing your goal, it is best to start small. It is best to start with a goal that is manageable because 1, you will be able to achieve it faster, and because 2, the feeling of accomplishment from achieving that goal, again, is giving yourself that feeling, that high emotional feeling of accomplishment that then the bloodhound in your subconscious will go out and relentlessly hunt down again. Think of it like a snowball effect. If you've ever heard of the snowball effect in terms of paying off debt, it is a method in which you start by paying off the smallest debt first, regardless of the interest rates on the debt. By paying off that small debt first, you are giving yourself a boost in confidence, which will then empower you to pay off the next smallest debt. And you can think about this also as a kind of networking. Part of being successful in whatever endeavor it is that you do is having and making connections with people who can help you access new opportunities. So be somebody that people want to help. The next thing he talks about is align your purpose. And we're going to come back to Jim Carrey. When Jim Carrey was first doing his comedy shows, stand-up comedy shows, in the beginning of his career, and he was getting a little bit of traction, he says he would go home every night after his show and he would ask himself over and over, what do they want? What does the audience want? In trying to better his comedy, he finally one night came to the conclusion, they want to be free from concern. And it was using that knowledge, finally understanding what his audience wanted, that he was able to shift his comedy to help solve the problem of the audience. And it was during his very next show that he did his famous, "How are you all tonight? Alrighty then." And it took off. His career took off at that point. And he looks back, and he has stated in interviews that he sees that as a turning point in his career. It was the moment that he connected his dream with a cause that was bigger than himself. He also says that he's always looked back and seen himself as being two different versions of himself. And one was the one entertaining all the guests in the living room, and the second was the one jumping on his mom's bed, trying to make her smile. And it wasn't until he connected the two, essentially, that he found tremendous success. Carrey is quoted as saying, "My choosing to free people from their concern got me to the top of the mountain." He says the effect that you have on others is the most valuable currency there is. So Doty suggests that you sit down with a pen and paper and you write out your specific goals, maybe 4 or 5 of them, and then think deeply and try to connect them to a greater purpose. What impact will you have by achieving your goal? Will you inspire others to achieve theirs? Will you bring awareness to a certain topic? Will you be able to help out a certain demographic of people? And that leads us to our last step, step 6, which is release expectations and open to magic. Now, even by following all of these steps and using all of these methods, there will inevitably be times on your journey of chasing your dreams where you feel maybe stuck or confused or lost. But sometimes it's these failures that lead us to the opportunities that we never even imagined, that are even greater than the ones we initially sought out. And even though it sounds counterintuitive, Doty says that actually one of the most important steps of manifesting is letting go of your expectations. You may have a specific how, when, where, maybe rigid requirements of how you're going to accomplish a certain goal. But be sure that these strict requirements in your mind are not closing you off to greater opportunities. You can work on this openness by saying things like, it's okay, when one door closes, another will open. Or, okay, I guess the how isn't up to me. Doty also talks about this interesting paradox between our relationship with ourselves and our relationships with others. And he says that the more we focus on our inner critic, that network of our brain, the DMN that causes that constant chitter-chatter in our minds, the more self-centered we are being. And sometimes the cure to that, to letting go of that self-hatred and that self-doubt and the inner critic, is to focus less on ourselves and focus more on the people around you. And by doing that, by shifting your focus to those around you, you'll find that you have less time to focus on the things that you think are wrong with yourself. And then lastly is gratitude. If we find ourselves becoming too attached to a particular outcome or a particular way of achieving that outcome, we may miss opportunities to be grateful for things we've already accomplished or things that are happening around us. And gratitude isn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling. Let me read you this study. So one study separated out a group of college students with clinically low levels of depression and anxiety who were seeking out mental health services. They sorted them into 3 groups. The first group, all while they received mental health services, had to write a letter per week, 1 letter of gratitude to someone who helped them. The second group was told to write down journal entries of their complaints and negative things that happened to them throughout the day. And then the third group did nothing. They didn't write. They just got counseling. After the end of the 3 weeks, researchers interviewed the students, and the students who wrote letters of gratitude had remarkably higher levels of reported self-well-being. And then they asked them again in a few months, and it was even greater, the difference between the students. But here's where it gets remarkable. Months later, like 3 months after all of this concluded, they brought in those same students, and they did an activity where a nice person, a benefactor, gave each one of them a small amount of money. And then they told them, if you feel like it, pay it forward and donate this amount of money to a charity or a good cause. And during this experiment, they were hooked up to MRI machines. And the students from group 1, who months previously had written letters of gratitude, experienced higher activation in their medial prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that experiences gratitude, which means they actually were feeling more grateful for that money. Practicing gratitude in the past had sensitized their brain to experiencing more gratitude in the future. So, being grateful for what you have now is literally priming your brain to experience more gratitude for what you receive in the future. And I don't know who wouldn't want to feel more grateful. Doesn't feeling grateful feel good? Now, to conclude chapter 6 and this book, Doty tells a story from 15th century Japan. It's about a Japanese shogun or military leader who had a set of ceremonial ceramic bowls for his tea ceremonies, and one of them broke. So he sent it off to be repaired, and when it came back, it just had metal staples in it, and he thought it was really ugly. So instead, he commissioned a local craftsman to find a better way of fixing these bowls. So the local craftsman repaired the bowls by filling in the seams with lacquer and then dusting them, sprinkling them with gold. And so now these once ugly cracks were now glittery and gold and even more eye-catching, more noticeable than before, but they were now beautiful. He turned the cracks into a work of art, and Doty compares this 15th century Japanese legend to our scars as human beings. Each one of us is a frail human being with our own cracks, our own scars, our own faults, and our own failures in our past. But yet we can be proud of them, we can coat them in gold and turn them into something beautiful. And so one of the ways to open yourself up to the magic of manifesting your goals is to paint your cracks gold. Okay, well, let's just end on that.